Welcome to Christian Virtual Fellowship, the online church for allegiance to the King. This morning, I'm going to, well, before I say that, if you're seeing this for the first time, if you're not familiar with our ministry, we invite you to check out the our website at a2kchurch.org. You can see it there in the slide, and just get in contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so this is part two of a series I'm calling Ears to Hear. And the first one was a few weeks ago, so it's a few videos earlier on the YouTube channel, Allegiance to the King. And I'm going to do a little bit of review from that one, just a little bit, and then get into a couple of things I want to introduce in this. But the basic idea with this teaching series is that we need to have ears to hear. Jesus was talking about this. He's using this phrase a lot, and it basically means having the desire to really understand. And it's a foundational piece of becoming a good, mature follower of Christ. So let's just dive right in. So we looked at the last time, Jesus gave this new commandment, John 13:34. And here I've got verses 34 and 35 that say, I am giving you a new commandment that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. You'll notice loving one another was not a new commandment. That's Deuteronomy 6, basically, right? That was an old commandment. And in fact, Jesus calls it the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor, as yourself, and which is essentially the same commandment. But this is a new commandment. So what's different? It's the just as I have loved you, that you also love one another, right? In other words, Jesus is adding this qualification to the kind of love that we have to have for one another. And the as I have loved you part is self-sacrificial love. That's what the kind of love that we're being commanded to have. And in fact, how how you will be known as his disciple will be characterized by that, by fulfilling that commandment. In fact, in John chapter 15, verses 5 through 14, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit. So we need to remain in him and he'll remain in us. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is thrown away like a branch and dries up, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. There it is again, this idea that we need to remain in him, and if we do that, we'll be bearing fruit, and and we will be proving that we are his disciples. Verse 9, just as the Father has loved me, I also have loved you. Remain in my love. Oh, okay. Remaining in him is remaining in his love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love. How do we remain in his love? We keep his commandments. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. That's the pattern that Jesus showed us, and we are to follow his pattern. He remained in God's love because he obeyed God. Verse 11, these things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. How is our joy made full? By remaining in Jesus, by obeying his commandments. Verse 12, it's going to repeat what we read in the last slide. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends. There's the self-sacrifice. You are my friends if you do what I command you. So we see this is if you're going to be a Christian, this is the main thing. You have to obey Jesus, and the main thing that you need to obey is this commandment to self-sacrificial love. Doesn't mean it's the only thing, but it is sort of the core foundation. And I've thought about something over the years. What's the point of all the different ologies, Christology, eschatology, soteriology, on and on and on, all of these different sort of knowledge based things, academic in some cases? It doesn't mean that it's not important. Soteriology, the study of salvation, is obviously an important subject. But what's the point of all that if you never actually become a Christ like person? What good is it if you don't become a kingdom character person, a Matthew 5 person, a Romans 12 person, a 1 Corinthians 13 person? If you don't become like Christ, no amount of your knowledge of all the ologies that are available, I'll put it this way for biblical Unitarians, no amount of knowledge about, um, you know, the truth of Unitarianism, the falsehood of Trinitarianism, what is John 1:1 really talking about? What is Hebrews 1 really talking about? No amount of that knowledge matters one lick if you're not growing into a Christ-like person, if you're not actually becoming like Christ, if you're not actually obeying his commandments. And obeying Jesus's commandment to self-sacrificial love requires us to be good listeners and communicators. This is where the ears to hear comes. In fact, it comes in. And in fact, Matthew 13, verse 19 says, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. Understanding is critical to the process, right? We have to have ears to hear. If we are going to properly obey his commandments, if we're properly going to learn how to become like Christ and be in the character that he's modeled for us, we have to have understanding. We have to become good listeners and communicators. Need to learn how to communicate. And if we do that well, it doesn't just help to save us because we turn to Christ and we become more like him, but it also helps us in every single aspect of life. Being a good listener, being a communicator is fundamental to being a good human being and to being the kind of human being that God wants us to be. A few proverbs that we looked at last time, Proverbs in Proverbs 18, verse 13 says, one who gives an answer before he hears, it is foolishness and a shame to him, right? And how often have I been guilty of that? How often have you been guilty of that? That I don't hear the whole thing. I got an answer. I got an answer. I got an answer. I'm going to tell you how it is. And we just look foolish. I don't know how many times I've had somebody try to tell me something on a subject that I am very knowledgeable about, and they've got the answer. And I know that they're wrong. I absolutely know that they're wrong. They don't know what they're talking about, and they just look foolish. I have been that, and later realized how foolish I looked and how foolish I was. Verse 17 says, the first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines them. And this is sort of a duh kind of proverb, right? Well, yeah, obviously this is true, right? But how often do we actually practice it? How often do we sit back and think, well, I need to listen to both sides of this story before I make a judgment? Not often enough. And verse 15 says, the mind of the discerning acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Again, foundational to growing up in Christ and having the wisdom that God wants us to have is this idea of listening to gain understanding, and which is part of communications. And so we got to get good at it. We got to learn how to do this right. We looked at something the last time called a choice map. This comes from Marilee Adams' book, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. You can find this map at her website. You'll see it in the bottom right there, inquiryinstitute.com. You can get a free copy of this map. It's got a second page. It's got a flip side. I'll show you here in a second. And I'll just you can go back and watch a little bit more about this on the last time, or you can get a copy of her book and you can learn all about it. It's really, really good stuff. And it's all about learning to have better communications, better interactions with people. What happens is our nervous systems are designed to help us, but especially in the modern world, they often lead us astray. Your nervous system, your fight, freeze, flee system, your protection system, you can feel it in your body when it's happening. And somebody, you get into an interaction that may be difficult, maybe challenging, maybe aggressive or whatever. Something triggers you or something like that. And what happens is you immediately go into that kind of protective mode. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. And that protective mode leads to something that she calls a judger mindset. And the idea of the judger mindset is you're asking questions like, whose fault is it that this has happened? Um, you might be saying things like, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with somebody else? A judger mindset can be you're judging another person, you're judging a situation, or you're judging yourself. And you're asking sort of blame-oriented questions. You're kind of having knee-jerk reactions, automatic reactions. You're you're in this orientation with the other person where you need to win, they need to lose, or they're winning and you're losing, and that kind of stuff. And you end up in what she calls the judger pit, where you're you're not getting anywhere. Nothing good is coming out of this. It ends up with complaining and arguing and dysfunction, separation in relationships and all kinds of stuff is where that path leads. But it's normal for us to sort of default into, who did this, right? Why did they, what's going on? Why are they always doing this? Why am I always doing this? And, and so it's natural for that to occur. And the more you learn about this, the more you see it constantly in yourself and in others. It's not that we want to learn how to never be in that judger mindset. That's not realistic. That's not going to happen. What we want to learn is how to switch over to what she calls a learner mindset, where you're asking questions like, what are the facts? What actually happened? Not just what one person might say, but what actually happened? And what do I want? What do I want to get out of this? What do I want from myself or this other person? What outcome would be the best ideal outcome in this situation? What do I want to learn out of this? And those kind of questions lead you down a learner path where you end up being able to make thoughtful choices. You can be solution oriented, and the relationship can be win-win. I'll say a little bit more about that on the second page in these switching questions. And then I want to get into a couple of tools that I want to talk about today that help us in this whole process of making switches and and having conversations with people and with ourselves that are so much more productive in creating connection, peacemaking, growing, and just better relationships overall. Much more Christ-like than often, we tend to be from what we've learned from the world. In the middle column there, where it says switching questions, this is how you make that switch from being in that judger mindset into that learner mindset. And I should I can't repeat this enough. I'm just scratching the surface of this stuff, encouraging you to dig more into this. So switching questions, these are just examples. Am I a judger? Just asking that question can be enough to make me go, oh, wait. I am definitely in that mindset. Um, is this what I want to be feeling or doing right now? This one I have found to be powerful when I'm interacting with someone, especially if they are in judger mindset, not with me, but with someone else or with themselves. I ask them the question, is this how you're feeling right now? Is that how you want to be feeling? And inevitably, it's like, no, no, I don't want to be feeling this way, right? And so these are switching questions. What else? How else can I think about this? Is there a different way different kind of perspective that I could have about this situation. And then, asking yourself the question, am I willing to make this switch and get out of that mode and start being more open-minded, trying to discover, really empathizing with the other person and trying to understand them clearly, those kinds of things. And what I have found in putting these into practice, the life is so much better. I just so much better. And it's like, wow, God, your wisdom is best, right? I can't be doing things like really hearing the other person, getting both sides of the story and stuff like that if I'm in this judger mode. Okay. So I'm going to do two techniques. The first one comes from Marilee Adams and her book. It's the ABCD method of switching, and it helps to create the environment in which it's easier to make the switch. So she uses this, these four letters A, B, C, D as a mnemonic to help you create to remember the process. So the A stands for aware. So the first thing when I'm in an interaction that might be a little challenging. Again, it doesn't have to be dramatic. This doesn't have to be a full-on fight. This can just be a conversation. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to become aware. Nothing else works until I have awareness. That begins with an awareness of my physical body and my emotions, right? So if if I'm in a little bit of a difficult situation, I'm going to become tense. I may become anxious. I may become fearful. I may become angry. All of those things are red flags. I'm in that judger mode. I'm probably not going to have good Christ-like attitudes and communications. And so the first thing I got to do is I got to become aware of that. And so I want to ask myself, presumably in my mind, how am I feeling right now? What are my emotions right now in this situation? And if I am having those negative emotions like fear, anger, nervousness, tension in my body, maybe my jaw's clenched, maybe my fists are tight, maybe maybe my arms are crossed kind of tight. Maybe I'm sitting with crossed legs and crossed arms, and I just want to notice these things, right? And if I notice them, that what that does, I am in that judger mode. I do I really want to be in this mode? Do I want to feel like this? And I think for most of us, the answer is absolutely not. I don't want to feel like this, right? And so becoming aware, that's the first step. Second step is to breathe. I've got to get that under control. It's really going to be difficult for me if I'm having negative emotions and my nervous system may be out of whack. I'm having, tension, tightness in my body. I need to relax. I need to bring that down. We talked a little bit, I believe we did, talked a little bit of last time about this. Maybe it was another time before about this idea. This comes from the book How to Heal Your Nervous System, where our nervous system has these. She uses an elevator analogy with colors, and so normal when you're just totally relaxed and stuff, you're fine. You're just doing your work, whatever. You're in green. Yellow is when you're in a little bit of a difficult. You're still under control, but you're in a kind of a difficult interaction or feeling uh, unease about the situation or whatever. Red is when you've just you're in full blown fight freeze. You're arguing with the person. You're wanting to just storm out. Those kinds of things. That's red. And and so the idea is to get yourself back from red to green. And breathing is a great way to do that. It's one of the most powerful ways to do that. There's a few others. And I remember now I taught a teaching back at the end of August of this year on that subject. If you want to go check that out, maybe Ray, you could link that video in the notes. The is getting your just even just breathing, and box breathing is a great way to do that, where you do 4 or 5 second count in, you hold for 4 or 5 seconds and in through your nose, not through your mouth. Hold it for a count of 4 or 5 seconds, breathe out for a count of 4 or 5 seconds, and then hold for a count or 4 or 5 seconds. It's an simple, excellent tool to get yourself back under control. If you're in a situation where you need to take a break to go do that, do it, right? Even if you have to, you're in a situation where you can't say, hey, listen, I'm feeling really tense right now. I need to take a moment, if we can just come back to this in a few minutes. If you don't feel like you could do that, then excuse yourself to the bathroom. Hey, I got to go to the bathroom. Go to the bathroom. Do your breathing in the bathroom, right? Do something to get yourself, you've created the awareness, get yourself back under control, because you're not going to be able to ask yourself those switching questions and go into that learner mode where you can be a peacemaker, where you can be merciful, where you can be more humble, where you can be more inquiring and curious, and having ears to hear that other person. You need to get yourself back into that green place, right? So then the C is curious. So where I'm trying to get to, this is the main goal, is to switch my mind from being judgmental to curious. Walt Whitman had a quote, be curious, not judgmental. And what a great quote. That when I'm judgmental, I'm not curious. I'm not listening to the other side. Somebody tells me something somebody else did, and I'm just like, maybe to them or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, that terrible person. I can't believe they did that. I'm being judgmental. I'm not being curious, right? If I were curious, I'd want to know more. Oh, tell me what happened. What happened before that? What led up to that? What do they say that their side is, right? If the other person can't tell you what the other person's perspective is, they are being judgmental. It doesn't really matter what the other person, whether they were wrong or right, right? They they are being judgmental. And so if they cannot articulate clearly the perspective of the other person, and even then they may be wrong about that, right? Maybe they didn't they have that's really their perspective of what that other person's perspective is. We have to get curious. The learner path is a path of curiosity, right? It helps, and this helps us in so many ways. If you're in a disagreement with your spouse or your friend or your coworker or your boss or whatever, getting curious can get you out of that vicious cycle of arguing with them, being disgruntled or whatever, can get you out of that. But then it also helps in things like getting to the truth of a Christian doctrine, right? There's so many disagreements in Christianity. And the way to get to the truth, it's not necessarily a fast way or an easy way, but it's really the only way, is to get curious, because curious is ears to hear. You don't have ears to hear if you're not curious. So we have to get curious. And there's a lot of different ways to this. I'm going to go, and the next thing that we're going to get into is going to deep dive on a technique that really exudes curiosity. And it's kind of a how, even when you're not really wanting to be curious, if you'll do this, then you end up being curious because of the methodology. But we all know kind of what curious looks like. We feel it when we're like, huh, I want to know more about that, right? It's just hard to do it in more difficult situations, in challenging situations. And because our natural path is that judger path. And that's why we need to get ourselves back under control and then ask those switching questions that we were talking about. Am I in charge of Rome? Yeah, I'm in charge of Rome. Do I really want to be in this? No. What are some other ways that I could look at this situation? What outcomes do I want from this situation? And that leads you over to where you start to be curious and ask the curious questions like, why do you think that way? Tell me more about that. And then finally, D is decide. And it's not, the judger path is not judgment. Judgment can be good or bad. The judger path typically leads to bad judgment. The learner path, it's intended to lead us to good judgment. So the final thing in the process is we can make a decision about whatever it is that we're dealing with, but now we're going to make a thoughtful decision, a decision based on good judgment, not judgmentalism and bad judgment. Jesus said in Matthew 7 that the standard by which you judge is how you will be judged, right? And so if we're making bad judgments, it's bad, right? We want to make good judgments, right? So we need righteous judgment, and we're not going to be there if we don't have ears to hear, we're not communicating well, we're not listening carefully, we're not being curious, we're not on that learner path to get to a thoughtful decision, one that is characterized by Christ. So that's A, B, C, D: aware, breathe, curious, decide. The second one that I want to go through is a technique called looping for understanding. And this is where you're you're in that you want to get in that curious mode. You want to actually gain understanding the other person. And this methodology is very powerful. I've been using this for a really long time. I was using it before I knew what it was called. I don't remember where I originally got this idea from, but I know it didn't come out of the world of where this phrase comes from, the world of mediation and that sort of thing. And I got it many years ago in trying to get better at learning the Bible and where people were coming from in the Bible. And so it's a powerful tool in a lot of different ways, and it has several steps. So the first step is you have to listen with the goal of understanding, not the goal of proving you're right and they're wrong or anything even remotely close to that. The goal has to be that you're going to listen until you have a really good sense of what they're trying to say. What is their perspective? And this means you cannot be thinking about what you want to say or how wrong they are or want to be sharing with their ideas. You got to throw all of that out of the window. You got to self-sacrifice, right? You got to ask questions like, you know, when you say this, whatever this is, what exactly do you mean by X? Right? So maybe they used a term and you're trying to see, are we on the same page about that term? I need to get to where I really understand them, right? Um, Another thing that you could say is, would you say you mean this, right? And you're asking these clarifying questions, and if they say yeah, I'm like okay, and I keep listening and I keep listening. I want to minimize interruptions. I want to stay focused on what they're saying. When I'm doing this in important conversations, I have a notebook and I take notes. Now, this you may not need to do this. I need to do this. My mind likes to wander, and so note taking helps me to stay focused. But I find that the more I'm focused on really trying to get to the place where I understand them, the more I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to listen and my mind's not going to wander. Um, and what I'm trying to get to is to step two. Step two is where I'm going to communicate that understanding back in my own words, and this is my goal. I want to get to the place where I can articulate their position, their view, their understanding, at least minimum, as well as they can, and hopefully actually better than they can. When I've used this technique, I've actually have had that happen a number of times where I've dug in to gain understanding, and at the end of it, they're going, wow, that yeah, I've never said it that way, but yeah, that's exactly, that's you've said it better than I say it, and and you can actually do that. You can experience that. Sometimes when we have a position, there are pieces of it we haven't really thought through, and somebody starts helping to try and clarify their own understanding of what we're saying. And in the process, together, working together, you come up with an even better way of articulating whatever it is. And so what I'm going to do is when I think I've got an understanding, I'm going to communicate that understanding back to them, but I'm doing it for confirmation from them. So this is step three. I want to ask for confirmation. I like saying something to the effect of, let me repeat back to you and see if I've understood. And then I'll repeat back to them what I think they're saying. And then I'll wrap it up with, have I understood that correctly? Is that correct? Am I properly saying what you mean? Something along those lines. I want confirmation. All of that stuff is really powerful, and a lot of studies have proven this out, is very powerful for changing the other person in how they're interacting. Maybe they're not looping for understanding from their perspective. Maybe they're still in yellow or red or whatever. Doing this process helps them come out of that. Because when they start to sense, wait a minute, this person is genuinely trying to understand me, it starts bringing them back down. They become more collaborative. Well, they're like, well, yeah, part of it, yeah, you got correct, but this other part, no. And and then, you know, you receive their confirmation, right? So you're listening to the confirmation. They say, yes, this other part, yeah, this part, but not quite that part. Um, and they say, something um, along the lines of, um, oh, I, I feel like you're kind of getting close, but that's not exactly it. You want to come back with, oh, great. Help me understand, right? Which part of it am I not understanding? And I am 100% focused on their understanding. I've got to leave out my whole thing. So this is a good point when I'm receiving their confirmation to acknowledge their position, right? Their feelings, whatever it happens to be, their perspective. So I want to do things that are, it doesn't have to be agreement on my part, like, oh, I didn't realize that. I was so wrong, you're so right. Maybe, but but you can just say things like, that must have been pretty upsetting for you. Or you could say, okay, I'm starting to see how you came to that understanding. What that creates is it creates this environment between you that um, is a connection. It fosters an environment of in which agreement can actually take place, whereas before it's probably not likely to take place. That's interesting. I didn't realize. Uh, Daniel, you're writing on my screen. I don't even know how to erase that, so that's going to be in the video. um, so we want to do that acknowledgement at this stage, but now there's going to be a temptation, both on their part and on your part, um, to maybe move to your perspective, right? You don't want to do that. It's called looping for understanding for a reason. We're not going to go through this one just one pass. I need to I need to loop back to the beginning, back to step one. If they tell me something like, um, you got it, you got it wrong, or you got it partially right, well, then that's obvious, right? I obviously need to loop back for that, right? Okay, I got to go back in, I got to dig in deeper and get some more correct understanding. But they may also say something like, um, well, yeah, you got it right, but I've got some other stuff I need to tell you. Then I need to be quiet. I need to listen some more, right? And then, but they might also tell you, yeah, you got it right. Okay. The temptation is going to be to leave it at that, right? And I'm going to say, okay, great. Now let me tell you my perspective, right? This is not the time to do that. You need to go deeper because they probably haven't told you everything. They might not even know what else they need to tell you. So you've got to loop back, right? So the way that you can do that is you can ask for more. You can say, what else would you want to tell me about that? I could ask a follow-up question, maybe something in there I can think about. Well, let me think about what we've talked about so far, and I want to really make sure that I understand. And then I think about, oh, you know what? I want to ask you this follow-up question on something, and or you could take some aspect of what they said that you haven't reflected back to them and say, well, there was this other thing that you said. Let me ask you if I've got that right, right? And so let me kind of repeat back to you, reflect back to you what I think you said, and then you tell me if I'm right about it, or if I'm wrong about it, and maybe we can work through that. And so you loop back through it until yeah, you feel like what they seem pretty happy. Yeah, this is exactly. Yeah, wow, this is really good. In the meantime, you've created peace in this situation. The most important thing is to accept where they are at the moment. They may be upset, they may be unhappy with you. You got to accept it. You can't be thinking about how you're going to tell them they're wrong about you. You're trying to understand, and so you've gained an understanding, and you're thinking in your mind they're so wrong about. They don't even know about this other thing. Blah blah blah. And it's very tempting when they say something that's missing a piece of information to throw it in there right at that moment. I certainly do this and say, "Oh, well, no, you didn't know that this other thing happened." This is not the time to do that. Keep going through the looping for understanding until you get very clear. You need to accept where they are at the moment and not be judging and judgmental and correcting and all that kind of stuff. Get exact why. How is it that they get curious, right? Okay, wait a minute. They didn't know about this other thing. Why didn't they know that? Right? Maybe I want to try and dig a little bit to figure out, oh, okay. Well, you said that when you went to the place on Tuesday that the nobody was there or something like that. T Walk me through that. What happened? You went to the place did you go inside or what happened? And I said, well, I did it. And you start to realize, oh, you know, wait a minute, what they're describing isn't even the place that we were supposed to meet at or something like that. Whatever it is, you keep digging for understanding, not throwing in stuff of your own to try and, you know, gotcha or correct them or stuff like that. Wait until you've really truly you can articulate their experience, their perspective, and you have a very good understanding of it. Then and only then you will be both of you in a good position for your perspective on the thing. First of all, you may have realized, you know what, I was totally wrong in this, and all you need to do is apologize and say, you know what, I was thinking about this wrong. I was thinking this, and boy, that was wrong. I didn't understand you at all, and I'm sorry for that. And or it could be that no, you really do know that now I can make a thoughtful judgment. Okay, I see where this went wrong. I see where their thinking is off. And you can, but now you're both in a good position to talk about it. Well, let me share my perspective on this and see what you think about it, right? And now you're both in that mode because you took the time to loop for understanding. So that's looping for understanding. I'm going to have more stuff like this in some future episodes of Ears to Hear, but let's open it up for some conversation and questions.